Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday and good morning or good day to wherever you're coming from. My name is Mike Ochs, and our first session together is a brief one. It's called Quick and Fun Ways to Incorporate Vocabulary into Your Day. And so, what I'll do in this very brief session, I'm going to start about a minute early. Here we go. And I'll linger afterwards if anybody has any additional questions. But since it's brief, I'm just going to kind of run straight through it. Who knows? Maybe I'll end a couple minutes early. So, here's our session. Quick and fun ways to incorporate vocabulary into our day. The first one, I like to use a framework developed by Michael Graves, who wrote the vocabulary book. You can check out either edition, first or second edition. And he provides a helpful framework for how to think about vocabulary across the day. And the first way he talks about acquiring vocabulary acquisition is what vocabulary researchers and theorists will call creating a word consciousness, or I'll often call it fostering an awareness and a curiosity of words and what they do. Basically, perhaps creating an environment of word love. And so some of the recommendations include things as simple as use highfalutin language with your kids, that you don't need to dumb down your talk with kids. I remember a year I taught third graders, and I don't know if you've ever taught a lesson and a kid raises their hand and you call on them and they're like, "What's for lunch?" And that's what happened to me one day. And I said to the 8-year-old, I said, "That's irrelevant." And I saw the whole class like sort of like cock their heads to the side and like get that puppy dog look and try to sound out the word and try to say it. And I was like, "Oh, here I go." I was like, that means it doesn't fit with what we're doing right now. And what was amazing was they certainly had a concept for irrelevancy because they know what fits and what doesn't, what goes with what's happening right now. So by the end of the year, if somebody interrupted the mini lesson with a question or a comment like that, their partner would sort of kindly nudge them and they'd be like, "That's irrelevant." And so that word may not have been in their vocabulary had I not incidentally used it. I do think there's a difference between using your highfalutin language when you're teaching versus when you're just communicating with kids. We do want to be very clear when we're speaking to kids. Teacher clarity is a top influence on achievement. And so being careful about the highfalutin language you might use when you're teaching, but not all of our communication with kids is straight up teaching, right? So there's plenty of opportunities for using fancy words across the day. You just have to think, do kids have a concept for this word? And for the most part, they do. You want to invite kids to be curious about words. Maybe they can collect words in their reading notebook and they can bring them into things like book club conversations. A lot of book club conversations are interpretive. We talk about character traits and themes. Maybe they could do an analytical conversation, do some author's craft. Why did the author choose this word? What other words could they have chosen? You could foster a conversation in that direction, a more analytical direction. Other ways to be curious about words are classic, like word of the day. If you have a word of the day or a word of the week, that's something that you can just introduce very briefly to students, bit by bit, day by day. It's not too much extra time if you've already got some sort of morning meeting or just some sort of transition time. Good morning, class. Here's our word of the day. Here it is. Here's how it might connect to your lives. Any questions, stuff like that. Moving on. Playing word games. I think there's fun work with Freddie Hebert, and she does a lot of work around different continua, or talking about shades of meaning, or talking about connotations of words, whether words have a positive or negative valence to them. But you can also simply play word games by like telling jokes. Get out a joke book. Right? And read some jokes. Most joke books for kids are puns. It's a way to play with language, to have fun with language. Maybe you have a joke of the day. Invite kids to tell jokes of the day. They start being curious about words and how they work. It's not too much extra time, and it gets them curious about these things like, well, most jokes are kind of homophones, right? Anyway, sometimes homographs as well. You can do work with homophones and homographs, fun little games that go along with that as well. And then being sort of aware of the books that you read to kids. If you want to boost their vocabulary, thinking about books that are centered around vocabulary, they're about words. The plot is around words. Like joke books, books that have idioms in them. Those Amelia Bedelia books where like they have double meanings and all those types of things, or just books that have really high vocabulary. I think of some of the reading units of study read alouds that I would assess as like have really great vocabulary. Are fourth grade's Number the Stars. It's just probably one of the best books for vocabulary I've ever seen for children. And then for those of you who teach fifth grade, that spooky book, what's it called? The Thief of Always. That vocabulary is really sky high, but it's chock full. You can't get through a paragraph without having to tell kids what maybe some of the words mean. But the idea is to invite kids to be curious and aware of words and what they do. And that can be as simple as inviting them to collect words, having a word of the day or a joke of the day routine. Next thing you want to do is you want to teach kids to teach them to help themselves. You can give them some fish, but you can also teach them to fish as well. And that's teaching kids word solving strategies. How do they figure out words when they're by themselves and no one's there to help? And the three that I like to talk about is not just look in, look around, but I call this one now look it up, right? Look in, look around, and look it up. Look in is inviting kids to be curious about the morphology of words and how you can break apart a word and look inside it to figure out what it means using prefixes and suffixes, roots. And as kids get older, Greek and Latin roots, things like that. Looking around a word, thinking about context clues, the different kinds of context that there are. There's synonym context clues. There's definition context clues. There's antonym context clues, contrast, and general context clues, and teaching kids about those context clues and what they do and how you want to think through them can be helpful. And then teaching kids how to use a dictionary, sort of a lost art, whether it's a paper-bound dictionary or even a digital dictionary, giving kids the ropes. It's not like you need to teach a whole unit on reading dictionaries, but maybe you could spend a small group or a mini lesson or a conference on how to navigate this thing. If it's a paper-bound dictionary, how to alphabetize, how to use the guiding words, pronunciation keys, how to read through multiple meanings and multiple definitions. And if it's an online dictionary, how to read multiple meanings and multiple definitions, how to toggle back and forth from what you're reading to your dictionary and back, how to make sure that you're checking everything. Do you have to scroll to check the whole definition? Do you have to press a page? What do you have to do? Collins and Wordsmith are two good online dictionaries that I like. Collins, I probably use more when I'm teaching kids words what they mean, and Wordsmith is good for kids. But any children's dictionary is preferable to a more general or collegiate dictionary, because those dictionaries are not as helpful. They have like circuitous definitions, like sarcasm, the state of being sarcastic, not helpful. Or they have vocabulary words inside their definitions that kids don't know. And so it's like, no, I don't know what this word means either. Thesauruses, I'm not sure why I put that on there. Thesauruses are more for writing. Yeah, thesauruses probably should go on the first chart that I shared, like, creating that environment of word love, because the sources are for when you already know what a word means. You want to find a new way to say it. So I should remake this post-it and put it on the first one. It's a great way to play around with your vocabulary. Like, what else could I choose? And being a kid is the perfect time to use and confuse the different shades and connotations of meaning. And we can help them with that. If they go to the thesaurus and pick a crazy word that can be like, I'm not sure that's exactly what you meant. Here's what this connotation of the word means or suggests. Great fun thing for kids to learn as children. All right, third thing of 4 is to teach kids what some words mean and use them together. This is what most people would consider as vocabulary, teaching and learning individual words. Sometimes there's a little bit of a controversy on it, although there shouldn't be. If you read any research on vocabulary, it says that teaching and learning individual words is a part of any vocabulary program. But if you ever hear people sort of critique it, some of the things that they might say that you can speak back to are things like, it's traditional, right? And by traditional, what they mean is it's old and outdated. And I like to turn that on its head. And I say, what's old and outdated is not being up to date on the current vocabulary research, which suggests that teaching and learning is a part of any vocabulary program. Teaching and learning individual words, excuse me. Another thing critics will say is like, oh, it's teaching words in isolation, they'll say. And I'd like to turn that around and say, no, what's isolating is not knowing what words mean and not being able to use them, not being able to use them in your speech or your writing. Teaching individual words. The point of teaching individual words is you want to hear kids say it and see them write it. That's expansive. That's not isolating. What's isolating is having a small vocabulary. And what teaching and learning individual words does is allows you to learn a small number of words. It's not a lot of words. You don't teach a lot of words, just a few numbers, few words, but you teach them deeply. The point is that you want them to be in what's called their expressive vocabulary. Expressive vocabulary is words that you can say and words that you can write. And those you say and write the words that you really actually know. Receptive vocabulary is words that you can kind of get the gist of when you read it. And you can kind of get the gist of when somebody's speaking it to you. A lot of kids have a lot of words in their receptive vocabulary, and that's okay. But just be cautious, because sometimes you might show a bank of words to kids and then you say you read all the words in the bank, and you ask the kids, do you know these words? They're like, yeah, I know these words. No, they don't. Or I should say, not as deeply as they think they do. The next question I ask is like, oh, how would you teach this to somebody else? What would you say? What would be the definition of that word? Could you give an example? Watch them clam up. The words in their receptive vocabulary, not their expressive. And that's not good enough if you want them to say it or write it. So how to do it? Find words in their books, because this is where they'll encounter those words. Give kid-friendly explanations. I use Collins Online Dictionary to help my kid-friendly explanations. Use the words in your conversations, and then you invite the word use in writing. What's the research on vocabulary and writing? It's very brief. Here's the research. It says you want kids to write vocabulary words, teach the vocabulary words well. That's it. It makes sense, right? Because if you know the word, it doesn't take much to then write it. And then the last way to acquire vocabulary is to basically read a ton across genres, right? Have wide reading experiences. Incidental vocabulary learning occurs through a lot of wide reading. So you can read across a lot of genres. You can have kids be read to across a lot of genres. They can talk about books across a lot of genres. But the point is across multiple genres and reading a lot, because the more different genres you read, the more sort of sets of vocabularies you are immersed in. And kids learn more words in 1 year, breadth-wise, than you could possibly teach them, albeit most of those words are like at a receptive level, right? They kind of get the gist of them. They don't know them quite as deeply. It's nice. So wide reading and individual word learning are nice complements. One is about breadth and the other is about depth. So they're both important.